We're going to learn about equivalent fractions on this video. The first thing we need to know about equivalent fractions is that they are equal, and we can see that in the word itself. They're the same amount, it's just that they've been partitioned into different sized parts. So let's look at our first circle. Our denominator is 2, so that means that it has been cut into 2 equal parts. And if I want to have 1/2, I'm going to go ahead and just shade in 1/2 of that. So that's one of those 2 parts. Now, if I want to know how many fourths that would be equivalent to, we can look at that on this fraction over here. So I'm going to shade in one of the 2 parts on this circle. So I am starting with 1/2. Now I'm going to switch colors and I'm going to do my work in red. All I'm going to do is cut each one of those pieces into 2 parts. So I cut this first piece into 2 parts, and I cut this piece over here into 2 parts. I'm not going to shade anymore. I'm not going to erase anything. All I'm doing is cutting it into more pieces. These are the same amount. The only difference is this one is cut into smaller pieces. Now let's look at, and I can fill this in. I would have 2 of those sized pieces. So let's look at how this would work in a number sentence. So if I have 1/2, and I have our Minecraft sword here, because you know what? It reminds me of a multiplication sign. And we can think of when we're multiplying in this situation, we're cutting our fraction with our sword into smaller pieces. So how many pieces did I cut each one into? Well, over here I cut each part into 2 pieces. So that means what I really did was I multiplied by 2 over 2. Now we know that 2 over 2 is really equal to 1 whole. And let's just go back to what we know about multiplication. 3 times 1 is still 3. 102 times 1 remains 102. So I know that if I multiply any fraction by 1, I'm not changing the amount of that fraction. So we can multiply by a fraction equivalent to 1, such as 2 over 2, and get an equivalent fraction. This is called the identity property of multiplication. That means we can multiply any number times 1, and that number will remain the same. So let's go ahead and work the math on this. If I multiply my numerators, 1 times 2, I have 2. And if I multiply my denominators, 2 times 2, I have 4. So I can see that my 2 fractions, 1/2 and 2/4, are equivalent, both with a model or with number sentence. Let's take a look at another example. So we're going to start with 1/2 again, and you can see that I've already put 2 circles up here where I have shaded 1/2. So if I want to know how many eighths are equivalent to 1/2, I'm going to go ahead and cut each of these pieces into smaller pieces. So here I have fourths, and I'm going to cut each of those pieces into 2 pieces as well. Now I have 8 pieces, and I can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them shaded. So I'm going to fill in my numerator. 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8. Let's look at this mathematically. So if we start with 1/2, we know because of the identity property of multiplication that I can multiply any number times 1. So let's make a fraction equivalent to 1. Now let's go back to our model. We can see that we cut each piece. So this was the piece I started with. I cut it into 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller pieces. So we're multiplying by 4 over 4. 4 over 4, which is 4/4, is equivalent to 1. So I can multiply by that without changing the value of 1/2. if I multiply my numerators, 1 times 4 is 4. And let me multiply my denominators. 2 times 4 is 8. So 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8. In this example, we're going to look at how many thirds 2/6 is equivalent to. So you can see in my rectangle creeper down here, I have already shaded 2 out of 6 parts. So I'm going to do the same in this rectangle. Now, if I want to go from sixths to thirds, I need to put some pieces back together. So when we did our equivalent fraction examples before, we were cutting pieces apart into smaller pieces. Now we're going to do just the opposite. I'm going to take 2 pieces and I'm going to glue them back together and create one large piece. So I need to do that with each of these. So let me go ahead and do that right now. So we're going to take these 2 parts and we're going to package them into one new part. I'll take these 2 parts and package them together into one new part, and I'll do the same with these. So now I have one of the 3 that are shaded. So I can fill in my numerator here. So 2/6 is equivalent to 1/3. Now let's look at how we do that mathematically. We didn't cut pieces in this one. We glued them back together. So in this situation, we're going to be dividing because we're putting 2 parts into a group. And when we're doing division, all we're doing is putting numbers into groups. So we're going to group them by putting 2 parts together. So that means I need to divide by 2 over 2. And remember, 2 over 2 is really equal to 1. So I can divide by 1 without changing the value of my fraction. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So we can see that mathematically, this corresponds to what happened in my model. Let's look at one more example. So in this example, we're going to start with 9/15, and we're going to see how many fifths that is equivalent to. So you can see in my first creeper, I have 9 out of 15 parts shaded. I have the same thing in my other creeper as well. And if I want to create 5 parts instead of 15 equal parts, I need to think about how many pieces I need to glue together. Well, I can see that these are in 5 columns. So I can just package together or glue together the pieces in one column. So if I glued the here and I glued down here, then I would glue these 3 pieces together and make one new piece. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take these over here and we're going to make one new piece. I'm going to take these right here. I'm taking 3 parts, putting them back together and making one piece. I'm going to do that with all of these columns. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. And I can see that these 2 are completely unshaded. And these 3 are shaded. So 9/15 is equivalent to 3/5. Now let's look at mathematically how that relates to the model. Remember, if we're gluing things back together, we're grouping them, then we're going to be using division. So I had 3 parts that I put back together. So that means I put 3 in each group. So I can divide by 3 over 3. And you know what I'm going to say? 3 over 3 is equivalent to 1 whole. That's why I can do this. So let's check to make sure that this is the correct way to do it. 9 divided by 3, it is 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So I can verify that 9/15 is equal to 3/5. So let's have some thinking time with Steve. After his journey learning about equivalent fractions, he remembers that equivalent fractions are the same amount, but the pieces are just a different size. And I'm sure he's also thinking that when we are cutting pieces apart, we're using multiplication. And when we're gluing them back together, we're using division.